Добрый день.
Good afternoon, good morning, dear colleagues. We begin the press conference by Foreign Minister of the Russian Federation, Sergey Lavrov. I'd like to remind you that we have the broadcast on all the accounts of the Foreign Ministry on social networks, and we have simultaneous interpretation into English, Russian, and Spanish. Over to you, Minister. Thank you very much. First of all, heartfelt best wishes to all those attending on the occasion of the New Year, and Merry Christmas to all those who mark that holiday, and to all those who treat life with a grain of salt. I'd like to congratulate those people with the arrival of the old-style New Year. That will bring, I hope, a lot of good developments apart from the routines of life that cannot be helped, and we'll be talking about that. General assessments of the international situation that developed over the past years, and the assessments of our tech and our activities and the goals of our work at the international arena were spelled out by President Putin during his press conference on the 19th of December last year. And prior to that, he had regularly touched upon the international affairs and different interventions of his during the call-in and the Valdai Club and on other occasions also, so I will not dwell on those developments that filled the essence of international life and comprised the gist of our initiatives in detail. I'll only remind you that the current contemporary historical epoch is the one of a standoff between those who uphold the international law, key principles, and the world order that developed after the victory over the Nazism and the Japanese militarism in the Second World War, that was enshrined and consecrated in the most important international instrument. I'm referring to the UN Charter. And those, on the other pole, who are not satisfied with the Charter, and those who decided after the end of the Cold War that it was all over, the game was over, and the main rival in the face of the USSR and the social camp was oppressed forever. And then they decided they would be guided not by the UN Charter, but by the wishes that brew inside the so-called political West, made up of the US and their also Asian allies, Japan, Australia, New Zealand, and Korea. Those were called the political collective West. And having felt that they won in the Cold War, they decided that in the future there would be no need to have any coordination with a strong rival in the face of the USSR then inexistent, and they would decide on their own, and that would be a top-down system similar to that of the party system of the Soviet Union, a cascade of party committees from top to down. At that point of time, the PRC did not clock up considerable economic achievements in political and economic development that it has been enjoying at this stage. So the West faced no opposition then, but in the past years, and President Putin repeatedly touched upon that, convincingly describing the root causes of the start of the special military operation, on the true origins that compelled us to repel the attack, the war waged by the collective West against us, that had the objective of repressing the main competitor, the resurgent Russia. I will not enumerate those causes, but the main reason was to weaken Russia geopolitically with the help of creating right on our borders, not somewhere far away, but right on our borders on the historically Russian territories that were developed by Russian Tsars and their servants, creation of direct military threats on that territory in order to curb and curtail our strategic potential, annihilating it as considerably as they can. And the second root cause was about people who lived on those lands for centuries, developing those lands, building cities and ports and factories. And the Ukrainian regime that rose to power with an unlawful coup d'etat were proclaimed those people terrorists. And that regime started a total sweeping attack against all Russian, offensive against all related to Russian language and culture that constituted the essence of life on those territories. And now we are seeing an apex of that battle, of these battles. I know that there will be questions on that, so I will not go into detail now. But once again, as they said in the Soviet times at educational establishments, the main contradiction of the current historical stage is the one between the proponents of multipolarity and the supporters of the UN Charter. On the one hand, those advocating for sovereign equality of states that requires all nations who ratified the UN Charter not to impose their will, but to prove that they were right and seek the balance of interests and come to terms. And all those principles contained in the UN Charter are those providing for the international legal framework of a just nature of the system that is called the Yalta-Potsdam system. And now many political analysts, including in this country, start saying that this is an epoch that is gone. I would not be in full agreement with that, because the international sense of the Yalta-Potsdam system does not require any retrofitting. Its underpinnings are the UN Charter, but the point is that the provisions should be implemented and executed, not selectively, like something on their menu, but in its fullness, as all the interrelations between the principles of the UN Charter have been unanimously approved by a special declaration of the General Assembly long ago. No one opposed that, but there is also the other camp or pole countering multipolarity now. So that camp assumes that after the end of the Cold War, the UN Charter was just ink on paper, and they had some instruments of their own. They have their own statute, the rule-based order, although no one saw it. So having this statute, they would arrive to every creed, to every temple, church, or synagogue. And this is the main contradiction as we see it. But actually, the desire of theirs to proclaim themselves as the masters of everyone's destiny is driven by a great deal of inertia still today, and this is alarming for me and very surprising, because, any sound politician should become aware that over the past 30 to 35 years, times have dramatically changed. And, the opposition to the dictate of the West is now reinstated, not in the face of the USSR, but, in the face of the new emerging economies and financial centers, China, India, ASEAN, the Arab world, the American and Caribbean community, new Russia with its allies, together with its Eurasian Economic Union, CIS and CSTO allies, including also BRICS and Shanghai Cooperation Organization. So all those powerhouse groups and economies in different regions belonging to the global majority of the global south. The new reality is already here, and there are in existence strong rivals and competitors who want to compete in sports and economy and other spheres, but the current elites of the West cannot overcome this inertia, and they are going downhill, trying to impede the path of their competitors everywhere. Like in the economy, the US proclaimed just recently a package of sanctions on microchips and AI, banning imports of those microchips to NATO and EU member states. So I have a firm belief that the United States needs no competitor in any field, starting with the energy, where they, in a headlong manner, give a go-ahead to perpetrate and pursue terrorist attacks that ruin the energy well-being of the European Union, and they prod their Ukrainian clients now to take out the Turkish stream as well. And the competition in the economy or rejection of competition and aggressive, unfair methods of repressing their competitors manifest themselves in the sanctions policies that became the basis of their international and foreign policy and affairs. They imposed sanctions against China and even against their own allies without the slightest hesitation when they start thinking that someone else would produce something cheap and be more efficient at international markets than the American manufacturers. And the sports is a kind of a soap opera of how fair competitions are turned into catering to the needs of a country that proclaimed itself to be the winner. So if Mr. Trump, when he takes office, makes America even greater again, so we should have a close eye on the possible methods of President Trump to attain those goals. I would not like to take more of your time. We have outlined the main contradictions of today. I'm ready to take your questions and respond. Please, RIA Novosti.
RIA News, you have the floor. Thank you very much. Christine Rodriguez. I'm here, Minister Lavrov. I'm here on the first row. Minister Lavrov, I have two questions, if I may ask them. My first question is about your opening remarks. You mentioned the Yalta-Potsdam system, that it is existing, but we have to respect its key provisions. What can we do about the fact that the world actors confessed that they were not going to consider the system relevant? How can Russia keep them inside the system? This is my first question. And my second question, President of Serbia, Mr. Vučić, makes such statements which are interpreted by some experts as the ones that go in line with the US policy. How how do these statements go in line with the special character of relations between Russia and Serbia? Speaking about the Yalta and Potsdam system, this system did not disappear. They say that this system is no longer viable, and political scholars say that we should find some other options given the new balance of power. No doubt, Yalta-Potsdam system was initially discussed and designed by writing the UN Charter. The states who fought Nazism did so, first and foremost the Soviet Union, the United Kingdom, the United States, and later, when the key fundamental principles of the post-war world order were agreed upon, France, and after the revolution in China, the People's China Republic also became the permanent member of the UN Security Council. The Charter, and it is my strong belief, does not need any improvements in terms of principles. The principles of equal rights, of self-determination of peoples, the sovereign equality of states, of territorial integrity of those states whose government behave appropriately, respect the rights of all nations living on a given territory, and that is why represent the whole population living on their territory, which is not the case with the Kiev regime in Kiev, which came to power as a result of a coup d'etat 11 years ago. From day one, they never represented neither the people of Crimea, nor the people of Donbass. All these principles are just. But there is one thing. Proponents of the UN reform say that the key injustice, the main injustice, is the permanent membership of some states in the UN Security Council with a veto right. We have explained on numerous occasions that this is a special mechanism which was non-existent in the previous structures in the world community. There were no bodies, no international bodies with special rights, but establishment of the permanent members mechanism was the lesson taught by the League of Nations. There was one state, one vote principle, and this did not allow people to give additional privileges to great powers, but it also prevented more influential powers to implement their special responsibility. They could not feel, they could not perceive their responsibility for the destiny of the systems included in the League of Nations systems. All other principles are absolutely just, and they should be implemented comprehensively, not selectively. Speaking about the UN Security Council reform, of course we need one, because those states who are especially responsible in world economy, in world finance, in world politics, and also in military scenarios, they are not represented in the UN Security Council. We have stated repeatedly that such states as India and China, I apologize, I mean India and Brazil, according to all criteria, they have deserved long ago permanent membership in the UN Security Council. And similar is also just about the African representation in the UN Security Council. On the other hand, the West is trying to disrupt this process by all possible means. They are trying to guarantee their dominance. And now, out of 15 permanent members, they have 6 representing the West, and the United States, among key candidates to the UN permanent presidentship, they name Germany and Japan. They have no independent voice in world policy. They are just blindly following the US political course. And when the United States press their interests directly, their voice is never heard, as it was the case with Chancellor Scholz when the gas pipelines were exploded. He just shied away from this question. He looked away from it. This is also the case of Japan, which is fully dependent on the United States. It is unfair. The West has 6 seats out of 15. We should increase the representation of the developing states. And together with this UN Security Council reform, we will make the West understand that it is no longer capable to impose on the whole world for many centuries its own rules, to pump out resources from Africa, Asia, and Latin America to live at the expense of others, and that we should seek the balance of interests. And we have a very good foundation for that. The international legal foundation of the Yalta-Potsdam system, international world order, and the UN Charter. We should only implement it. They should understand that they can no longer rule the world. Speaking about Serbia, of course, we want our relations with Serbia to be based exclusively on the interests of the Russian and Serbian people, on the interests of our states. In the overwhelming majority of cases, we have convergent positions, and these relations have concrete agreements, have concrete projects, including in energy, approved by heads of states, approved by governments, approved by companies and enterprises. We have shared and joint production. I mean, the corporation Serbian petroleum industry. This corporation cannot be nationalized. By no means. And when the United States, when Biden administration, Democrats have such manners in American policy to spoil the whole thing till the end of their mandate, as it was the case with Obama 3 weeks before Trump's inauguration, when he banished 120 diplomats from the United States and arrested 5 sites of diplomatic property. Of course, we had to respond. And the Russian-American relations were this whole case did not help Russian-American relations easier and less complicated. And if the deputy assistant on energy came, and he was present at the joint press conference with Vučić, he was lecturing them. You have 45 days to go. You have to get rid of Russian assets in Russian capital from the Serbian energy industry. Otherwise, we will prevent all your goods from the global markets. This was a very rude statement. But so to say, this is a trademark of the outgoing administration. when you were not elected and when your team which understands that this kind of the United States was not supported by the overwhelming majority of Americans, not from the political point of view, but from the moral point of view. You should just wait before the inauguration. You should understand that your people want a different kind of policy. No, they are unwilling to do so. They want to spoil the whole thing. Let me reiterate that we have a very rich history of common fight against Nazism with Serbia. For the right of people to self-determination, we support each other in the framework of international organizations. Of course, we see that they are twisting the arms of Serbia. And when President Vučić says that we will not divert from our course to the EU accession, and in response, he hears they say, we are waiting for you here, but first you have to recognize the independence of Kosovo. They are encouraging Serbia to make an act of self-humiliation, and also they want them to join the sanctions against the Russian Federation. Simultaneously, they want not only self-humiliation, but they want them to betray their ally. President Vučić has repeatedly stated that this policy is unacceptable, which is being pushed forward by Europe, the European Union, which is being approved of by the United States. Even from the legal point of view, this situation demands quite courageous decisions and solutions. When you have an agreement with someone which has nothing to do with us, but which has to do with our willingness and our aspiration to punish your partner, because we just want to do so. And this also backfired to you. It is up to the Serbian people to decide. The Vice Prime Minister, who represented Serbia during BRIC summit in Kazan, he made a clear statement in this regard. We will wait and see. We are in contact, we are in touch with our Serbian friends. We will hold urgent consultations and we expect their reaction. RT Spanish, the floor is yours. Minister Lavrov. Just lately, Venezuela held the inauguration ceremony of Nicolas Maduro, the legitimately elected president of the state. However, his rival at the election still says that he is the winner of the election. It is considered to be the winner by some other states, including the US. What do you think of the situation? Perhaps this situation is similar to the one we had during the previous election. What is the objective? What is the objective of Washington? In principle, Washington is blinded by its dominance, by its impunity, by its right to decide the fates of all the people in the world. It is not manifested only in Latin America, in Venezuela. Mr. Gonzalez, Svetlana Tikhanovskaya, they were also proclaimed as legitimate representatives of Belarus. At least she is received in the Council of Europe and some other Europe-centered organizations. This is what they think of themselves, and this means that they despise the whole world. This is a shameless statement. When we say democracy, this means only one thing: I will do what I want. Like Blinken put it, those who do not listen to us, they won't be invited to the democratic table. They will be on the menu. This is the clear manifestation of what they are doing. And they believe that they are entitled to decide the outcomes, the results of the election. Well, a state has a right. It's not an obligation. Those who are OSCE members, they can invite international observers. It is not a necessary thing to do from this Human Rights Bureau. They can invite it from any parliamentary assembly, from any other organization. The way they responded to the elections in Moldova, I'm not going even to describe how they organized the whole process to prevent half of the Moldovan population to vote who are living in Russia, and how to do everything possible to provide an opportunity for Moldovans living in the West, quite in a free manner, to give their votes in favor of President Sandu. Just look how they are tormenting the Georgian people. They are accusing us, they are accusing Russia. The OSCE observers found no serious and grave violations. This means that the process was legitimate and just. Take the case of Romania. It is a shame. I don't even know, maybe the so-called President González and Guaido follow the example of the former Georgian President Zurabishvili. In a very severe terms, 2 days before the inauguration of the new president, that she was not going to leave. She was going to be the only legitimate source of power in Georgia. She would remain in the presidential palace, giving orders. The following morning, she left anyway. And she was employed by a political think tank. It is not an easy thing to comment on the subject, because it is nothing but dictate, nothing but hypocrisy, disrespect for people, and overestimation of intellectual capacities. But we have to teach these people.
Xinhua, you have the floor. Your Excellency, Mr. Lavrov, I represent the International Xinhua News Agency. I have the following question. Some time ago, Minister of Foreign Affairs Van Yi said a short time ago that the Russian-Chinese relations are getting increasingly mature, stable, independent, and strong from day to day, and it is a benchmark of friendly relations between large powers and neighboring countries. How would you comment on this? What do you think? What is the secret of stable development of our bilateral relations, and what are your expectations of bilateral cooperation for this year? Thank you. Well, first of all, I completely share these estimates of the relations between the People's Republic of China and the Russian Federation, as it was formulated by my good old friend Van Yi. We held several meetings annually, and all these meetings are rather useful. They contribute to reaching specific agreements in the follow-up to the tasks that are being formulated and negotiated by President Putin and President Xi as regards our bilateral relations and our coordination on the global arena, there are no doubts that Russia-Chinese relations are one of the stabilizing factors of the modern international relations, as well as processes unfolding, in particular in order to incite confrontation and hostility in international affairs. Something our colleagues and our neighbors from the NATO are doing, led by the United States. They are always willing to drive a wedge between us and to seed hostilities, be it in South China Sea or be it as they formulated now in the Indo-Pacific region, including also in the Middle East, everywhere. The US have hundreds and hundreds of military bases everywhere, so it wouldn't take a lot of effort to incite a dispute, but we can see their schemes everywhere. They try to create destabilizing and confronting schemes everywhere, and after that, they simply look at how countries that pretended to have some influence in the region spend their efforts, their money, their time due to such provoked crises in order to settle these disputes, while the United States get increasingly more dividends, as they did during World War I, World War II, and in a similar way, the greatest burden of war against Russia with the hands of Ukrainian was put on the European Union. Leaders of the European Union, including France, Germany, and Italy, have to keep silent. Some people from the opposition, like Alternative for Germany and the Sarah-Wagenknecht Alliance and the National Front in France, the opposition do ask why they spend so much money while the poverty level is growing, while they see deindustrialization, when industry is fleeing to the United States because the US has taken steps to make sure that taxes are lower in the United States than in Europe, and energy costs about 4 times less than in EU. Well, I don't know, in California, the damage is estimated at 250 billion US dollars. It is about as much as they pumped into Ukraine. Those are compatible figures. And probably what we have seen during the international events like the cooperation platform with Asia in San Francisco, they have problems everywhere. They have poverty everywhere if you leave the central streets. So when the People's Republic of China and the Russian Federation speak up for an equal and friendly dialogue with the United States, it means, above all, that we are trying to uphold the principles of international communication as enshrined in the United Nations Charter. Those principles were formulated after World War II ended with the defeat of the German fascism in Europe and defeat of Japanese militarism in the Far East. And our heads, our leaders, agreed to celebrate these 2 great events, the 80th anniversary of the war in World War II in Europe and the 80th anniversary of the victory in the war in the Far East together. I'm confident those will be 2 landmark events, and they have colossal importance. They will serve as a reminder for all of us, for our children, and for the youngest generation, at what cost the peace was achieved. So we have to continue opposing the attempts to rewrite history and put equal blame on the Nazis and those who liberated Europe, those who liberated the Far East from Japanese militarism and the Eurasian continent. It is extremely important. It is an important component that glues together the Russian-Chinese strategic cooperation and multifaceted partnership between our countries. I believe that is the secret of our success. We have a shared history. We don't abandon, we don't deny our history. Neither Russia nor China have ever abandoned the obligations we have taken upon ourselves, including, I'll reiterate, including the obligations laid down in the UN Charter. Unlike the West will never say it is no longer considering such obligations as valid, but in reality, they never follow these obligations. Instead, they follow their narrow egoistic interests. So the body is established based on the Russian-Chinese partnership, the Russian-Chinese joint initiatives, undoubtedly belong to the new type platforms without those who lead and are being led, without masters and those who obey the masters. I'm talking about the SCO that is building up ties with the Eurasian Economic Union. The Eurasian Economic Union, in its turn, closely harmonizes its integration plans with the Chinese One Road and One Belt plans. I'm also talking about the BRICS. After the Kazan summit, it has become even stronger. Indonesia has become a full-fledged member of our grouping. We actively supported it during the Russian chairship. Another 8 countries have become partner countries. We are developing close cooperation and interaction between the Shanghai Cooperation Organization and ASEAN, as well as many other groupings and unions. We are doing so based on consensus, but obviously the Russian-Chinese tandem contributes to promoting all these processes in a rather efficient way with support of all other participants. So the international significance of our bilateral cooperation, our partnership and our plans for the future is huge. It is enormous, and I'm confident that these plans will be implemented. We don't want to be against someone. What we want is just one thing. We want all countries on our planet, including the entire collective West, led by the United States, and pursue their policy based on the respect for the interests of all of their partners. It is a shared position of Moscow and China. Good afternoon, Mika Badulan, Armenia. Your Excellency, Mr. Lavrov, I would like to ask you a question about the situation in Armenia. We see that they are trying to make sure Armenia goes their own path, and it becomes a hindrance to its very existence. It is being done to the detriment of centuries-long Russia-Armenia relations, and in the interest of Europe. We all know that Armenia has blocked its participation in the CSTO, and we also know that Armenian authorities ignore a number of events held on the Russian platform. At the same time, a short time ago, just recently, Armenian authorities started dragging Armenia into the European Union. It announced a referendum on the membership in the EU, and today we learned that Armenia is going to sign a document on strategic partnership with the United States. All of this is happening against the backdrop of real threats coming from our neighbors. It's happening against the backdrop of a growing likelihood of a new war. How does Moscow see the situation in Armenia, and what's your assessment of the developments? And a second question, if I may, regarding the 80th anniversary of the great victory that you have just mentioned. It is a great victory. It is a shared victory. The contribution of the Soviet people, including the Armenian people, to this victory was quite significant, as we know it. Would you agree that this victory and the memory of this victory is one of the foundations on which the strategic alliance between Armenia and Russia should base itself? The autonomous non-profit Eurasia organization, I'm a member of this organization, is very active. It has been very active over these 7 months in the Eurasian space. We are actively promoting the preservation of historical memory. We try to uphold traditional values. And I can say for sure that there is a broad interest for this initiative coming from our young people. In October, we held a large-scale event in Yerevan. It was attended by more than 1,000 Armenian students. Not only did we celebrate the holiday, but we also paid tribute to the victory in World War II. We laid flowers to the eternal flame. Thank you. While answering to your second question, it is something sacred for all peoples, primarily of the Soviet Union. They faced attempts of genocide on the part of Hitler occupants, but it is also sacred for all of those who fought as part of the army or partisan units of the countries and partisan movements, those who tried to uphold the truth, those who fought against Hitler army. In many countries, Nazi collaborators tried to commit attacks against those people. We never forget it. These parallels are obvious. Napoleon seized Europe and used it in order to go and win Russia. And the same happened with the Hitler Germany, when dozens of countries, occupied countries that were occupied by the Germans, sent their militaries in order to destroy the Soviet Union. And by the way, when Biden made his recent statement on the foreign policy, he said proudly, they have managed to strengthen the NATO and the allies. He said 50 countries were recruited in order to help Ukraine, as he said, but in reality the fight against Russia. So history repeats itself. Everywhere there are elements of superiority. The sense of superiority, as well as a wish to pursue what is called Bonapartism nowadays. During Hitler times, it was called fascism, and Nazism also serves as a banner for those who once again tried to destroy our country. So these anniversaries are sacred and something that's been done by the public organizations, in addition to what is being done by the governments, is extremely important. I know about your work in Armenia, not only in Yerevan, but also in other countries and in villages, in other cities and villages. Our embassy actively cooperates with them on the tracks where we can combine our efforts. I'm talking about the Immortal Regiment, the Victory Dictation, and the Garden of Remembrance, and similar campaigns. Those campaigns try to make sure that we talk to the young people and prevent them from forgetting the history. Our diplomats take care of the burials and memorials. And on the whole, we don't have the slightest doubt that the peoples of Russia and Armenia are friendly and brotherly nations. And the relations between our countries will always based on these reciprocal feelings of friendship. As for today's relations on the official level, they are not easy. You've mentioned just some facts. We've already commented on them. For example, when the law or government's decision was adopted to initiate the process of joining the EU, our Vice Prime Minister, Mr. Overchuk, is an experienced man. He's been dealing with the Eurasian Economic Union and its enlargement, its development for a long time. And he said it frankly that those things are incompatible. Those are two different FTAs, two different systems. Related to duties and customs duties. They don't coincide. Let me remind you, back in 2013, after our multiple reminders, the then President of Ukraine, Mr. Yanukovych, pointed to the fact that negotiations that had been conducted with the EU for a long time then about the Ukraine's association with the EU, that those negotiations implied that some parameters are to be adopted, and if they are adopted, there will be in direct contradiction with the CIS standards. And by the way, Ukraine enjoyed these rules as member of the Community of Independent States. They were close to zero. With the EU, in trade with the EU, Ukraine had significant trade barriers with the EU. The duties were relatively high. When we were joining the WTO, we traded significant elements in order to protect our services. If Ukraine continued having zero tariffs with the CIS states, and if it were to obtain similar zero tariffs or close to zero tariffs with the EU, it would mean that the goods would flow from the European Union through Ukraine to our territory without any tariffs. That's something that we explained to the Ukrainians.
When the Yanukovych government became aware of that, and when they figured that unless they did something, we would impede Ukrainian imports to Russia and they would suffer, bearing in mind that a lion's share of their trade was with CIS, not Europe, they just then asked to postpone the association agreement signature by several months to think it over. And actually, our proposal was to sit down together with the European Union and Ukraine, with the European Commission and Ukraine, at a table and think whether Ukraine could get benefits from the association agreement and not lose the benefits from the CIS FTA. And José Barroso, quite a haughty person, and he then said that was none of your business. He said we don't interfere with your relations with Canada. So anyway, coming back to Armenia, the decision of the legitimate Armenian leadership to start accession to any international group where they are wanted is their sovereign decision, but, weighing up all the pros and cons also would be the responsibility of the Armenian government and those in charge of their economy in the cabinet. You mentioned that Armenia blocked their CSTO participation. They just failed to participate, but actually, officially, they stated that did not mean that they had blocked or would block any decision-making where consensus is required. So the organization is fully operational. And back in autumn 2022, we approved the mandate of CSTO observer mission to play a buffer role on the border. But then our Armenian friends, well, it was ripe and ready, and at the last minute they declined. They said it would be hard for them to agree, because in September 2022, when a 3-day clash happened on the border, CSTO failed to protect the territory of its ally, and President Putin repeatedly mentioned this incident. There was no delimited or demarcated border. So 3 or 2 kilometers one way or another would be hard to determine as someone's land. There were some skirmishes, but this rejection of the CSTO mission that I believe would be efficient. Well, it was their sovereign decision too, after all. At the same time, they invited an EU mission there for 2 months period. And later, the Armenians, without asking advice of Azerbaijan, made this accord termless, and then Canada joined in, and this started meaning NATO's engagement, and we believe those people there have been looking into matters that are not relevant for Armenia, but rather of interest for some Western groups. Yesterday, Ararat Mirzayan signed an agreement with Secretary Blinken on strategic partnership. Well, this, after all, again, is a sovereign decision by 2 states. So it doesn't matter, well, not the fact or the title matters, but, the consequences. We also had the term strategic partnership in titles of many agreements with Western countries, but, proclaiming such strategic partnership whenever required this or that participant to act against a third party. In peaceful times, well, I'm not speaking about the Great Patriotic War, which is quite a different thing, but in the after-war epoch, no agreement ever spelled out that once we are strategic partners, you should join sanctions. And probably they would demand Armenia to do so, but dialogue continues with Armenia. Mr. Mirzayan has been invited to Russia, and he has accepted the invitation. We expect him to come shortly. Sky News.
Ivor Bennett from Sky News. The return of Donald Trump has fueled speculation of a peace deal in Ukraine. Is he the master deal maker he claims to be? And how far is Russia willing to go? What concessions are you willing to make to reach an agreement? And my second question, if I may, is what's your reaction to Donald Trump's recent refusal to rule out using military force to acquire Greenland? If that were to happen, how would Russia react? And can you rule out using military action in the Arctic?
Насчет Гренландии, Панамского канала.
With respect to Greenland and the Panama Canal, there are some specific initiatives in place that will be launched right after he takes office. Well, some of the initiatives to start negotiations with Denmark to purchase Greenland. At the same time, we hear statements by the Prime Minister of Greenland, and they have a peculiar relationship with Denmark. So he said that they don't want to be Danish or American, they want to be Greenlandish. So we should listen to them in the first place, like this country being a neighbor to some of the islands and peninsulas and others. And other territories, we listened to the opinions of the residents of Crimea, Donbass and Novorossiya to find out what their attitude to the regime that had come to power via an unlawful coup d'etat was. And they did not, those residents did not take this regime favorably, and this goes in full conformity with what I mentioned at the outset of the conference, a right of nations to self-determination. If an ethnicity or a nation being part of a bigger state believes it would be better off somewhere else, it wants to emancipate in line with the UN Charter, this big nation is obliged not to impede the expression of that will, not the way the Spaniards behave with Catalonians or not the way that Scotland is treated. If a smaller nation or an ethnicity expresses its determination to use this right, and the international law, as spelled out in the UN Charter and the UNGA Declaration, means and says that all should respect territorial integrity of nations whose governments will represent all the population living on that territory. If Greenland believes that Copenhagen does not represent its interests, so they probably have this self-determination right that comes into effect. But actually, a right for self-determination was the legal basis for the decolonization process back in 1960s and 70s, when the vernacular, the indigenous African tribes and peoples understood that the colonizers that ruled them then did not represent them and their interests. This is when the self-determination right enshrined in the UN Charter was implemented at a large scale in full conformity with the Charter, but not completely. Today, there are 17 non-fully self-governed territories remaining in the world. There is a decolonization committee of the General Assembly of the United Nations meeting annually and stating every time that the decolonization process should be carried through to the end. including the Yalta island, that the French would not part with, despite the UN decision, and the Comoran Islands, and Mauritius also, and 17 territories that are not fully self-governed. Still, the right of nations to emancipate, to self-determine is existent. It is the foundation of the decision to finalize this process of decolonization, and inter alia, this right is pertinent of the decisions by the Crimean residents and the residents of Donbass in favor of self-determination back in 2014 and 2022. Similarly to the African peoples that did not believe that the colonizers represented them, now the Crimeans, the Donbass residents, and the Novorossiya residents could not perceive the Nazis that came to power through a coup d'etat to represent them and cater to their interests and needs. So them Nazis, having seized power, proclaimed that they would eradicate the status of the Russian language in Ukraine, and they did so, and they banned laws, and they enacted laws banning the Russian language long before the special operation started. In the West, everybody is obsessed with the human rights, and no one said a word there then and now. Well, you know, human rights are reflected in Article 1 of the UN Charter. Well, everybody must respect human rights, respect of race, gender, creed, or ethnicity. So the canonic Orthodox Church in Ukraine is banned, and the language is banned in Ukraine. The Russian language is banned in Ukraine, and no one pays heed, although the West is so particular about the human rights, using every pretext to tout them. And, you know, in this case, day-to-day life of those people in Donbass was distorted and ruined, and everybody kept silent on that. So when President Trump, when he becomes president and takes office, comes up with his clear position on Ukrainian matters, we definitely will study and entertain that. And what is being said currently is being said in the run-up to the inauguration and major things. So as Donald Trump has himself said, he should first take office and become the lodger of the Oval Office. So all those things described in recent years have several aspects. Well, the fact that the real situation on the ground is now mentioned more frequently is commendable. And at the same time, Mr. Waltz, who, as I gather, will be the national security advisor in the future administration, and President Trump, in a big interview, mentioned also that they mentioned the root causes of the conflict in the respect that dragging the Kiev regime into NATO, despite the accords reached by the USSR and the United States in the past and later during the OSCE talks, where it was decided on top level by consensus, including presidents like President Obama in 2010. So that consensus decision spelled out not a single country or organization on the OSCE space aspires for domination, and no country will strengthen its security at the expense of someone else's security. And NATO has been doing what it promised not to do, exactly. And now Trump has voiced that openly. For the first time ever, a frank concession followed from the mouth of a Western leader that NATO members were lying when they signed documents and instruments with the USSR and later on the OSCE level. That was used as a screen, as a pretext and a garb to move closer to our borders, violating the agreements and on the terms of East Germany becoming part of West Germany, and NATO moved their infrastructure, military infrastructure, to our borders, and they planned military bases in Crimea and on the Azov Sea. We all know that, and at the end of the day, finally and eventually, after 2 years, of our reminding them about that, well, we start hearing that in the American narrative, but no one at this point publicly mentions the rights of the Russians and Russian speakers whose language and culture and mass media and canonic faith in Ukraine were legally prohibited. So we will not have a serious conversation if the West pretends it were normal, and like when the ongoing administration in the person of Blinken and Sullivan says that the new administration will follow in the footsteps of supporting Ukraine. Is it the inheritance to exterminate all Russian things? Is their last will? They want to be inherited, that all belonging to Russian language and culture should be exterminated. It is a testimony of Nazism and upbringing and raising Nazis as a form of foreign policy against a country that the United States want to contain and prevent it from having any competitive advantages. So we'll wait for specific initiatives from the American side. And President Putin said he would be ready to meet. At this point, we haven't received any specific proposals. And President Trump said he would be ready to meet, but first he should take office, he said. Greece Open TV.
You know, there is a paradox in Europe. Many millions of people in Europe, and I believe that in some states like mine, in Greece, in Cyprus, the overwhelming majority of people disagree with the policy pursued by our governments. The people strongly disagree with any kind of military escalation unleashed by anyone. Unfortunately, there is a paradox. With our own people, our government doesn't think it necessary to agree to align their policy with the opinion of their own people. Some governments even say that foreign policy is determined by some other factors and not by the will of their own people. That is why I would like to ask a question. Russia is a part of this shared European continent. What do you think? Will we ever be back on a normal track on our shared European continent? And one more detail. You are the most experienced diplomat in the world. And quite often you were involved in the Cyprus case. Now they are speaking about the new round of this negotiation process in Cyprus? Do you have any expectations, recommendations maybe, to those who will lead this? I will begin from your second question. I dealt with the Cyprus settlement when I was working in New York. The president of Cyprus came annually to the UN General Assembly. Annually, he invited the ambassadors of the 5 permanent states. We spoke how we could implement the principles enshrined in the UN Security Council resolutions. We also discussed the failures on our way towards the resolution of the Cyprus crisis. The last attempt, the Kofi Annan plan, I don't remember the exact date, when my good friend, may he rest in peace, Kofi Annan, my good friend, the brilliant Secretary General, he took a risk and he came up with a plan which would somehow change the decision made by the UN Security Council that the future central power and the eventual unified state would be weakened. Greek Cypriots would have less power, and this plan was denied. Since then, I do not know that any concrete steps have been made so far. Our Turkish neighbors, they say that these are 2 equal states and it cannot be any other way, that we have to come to terms to find a solution. We don't have any magic plan which we can propose or which we would impose. The interests of the 2 nations should be considered. The permanent members of the UN Security Council, they were considered to be guarantors of this process. But with the consent of Nicosia, this group of 5 doesn't come together to negotiate. The authorities of Cyprus, as far as I can suggest, with the United States. We want only one thing. We want the people of Cyprus to live the life they want in the north and in the south. Many Russian citizens live in the south of Cyprus, and more than 10,000 Russian citizens live in the north of Cyprus. We don't have the permanent consular office there, but we provide consular services on a regular basis, and we want the people of Cyprus to determine their future. We understand that the authorities of Cyprus have partners who do not merely want the people of Cyprus to come to a solution as soon as possible, but they suggest the ways of this solution. For instance, to join NATO, to change their domestic legislation in order to do something wrong to Russians who transferred money to the banks of Cyprus. And when they say what price, what cost should they pay to enter the European Union, and to Cyprus, they say we will have no problems in the NATO, we all will be allies. But here you have to diminish the number of Russians. Perhaps you should not remember so often about your shared history, and we do not interfere into this question. I understand that for Cyprus this is a very important issue, but from the geopolitical point of view, the first part of your question is far more important: whether we can come back on a normal track on our shared continent. This is a very important notion. It is Eurasia. the biggest one, the most densely populated one, and perhaps the richest one, a rival to Africa and with Greenland in terms of natural resources. But this is a continent where, with no unified structure, unified body for the whole continent. In Latin America, there is CELAC. In Africa, there is an African Union, along with many sub-regional organizations and structures in Latin America and in Africa. Of course, they are in place, but there is one organization for the whole continent. And here in Eurasia, we only have a sub-regional body. And we do not have one shared roof which would bring us all together. And it would be a good thing to have one, to establish one. You asked whether it is possible to have normal relations again. We understand that the West is a part of our shared continent. There are some organizations, OSCE, NATO, the Council of Europe, the European Union. The first two, OSCE and NATO, they are founded on the concept of Euro-Atlantic security with the participation of the North America. The European Union was established for Europeans, but not long ago they signed a treaty with the NATO in line with this agreement from the military point of view. If we have a war, God forbid, the European Union will act under the command of the NATO. They also said that Switzerland should involve if NATO should pass your territory into the direction of the Russian Federation. You should move away. You should lift all legal all formalities. The Council of Europe, the United States is an observer state, but what the Council of Europe is doing, including illegitimate tribunals, compensation mechanisms, some registers, in order to punish Russia as much as they could. This all is done under the instruction of the United States, the OSCE, the NATO, and now the Council of Europe and the European Union. And the Council of Nordic States, now they all are the NATO members. These all are Euro-Atlantic bodies, not Eurasian ones. And perhaps those who want to take control of Europe, they are interested in preserving this Euro-Atlantic structure and architecture to make it dominate. They understood not long ago that the northeastern part of Eurasia is a more promising region from the point of view of economy and infrastructure, where some projects can be implemented, where we have logistics and infrastructural prospects. So what does NATO want? What does Washington want? To bring the Eurasian continent into this Euro-Atlantic construction. Stoltenberg, not long ago, said that the security in the Euro-Atlantic region and the Indo-Pacific region is indivisible. The indivisibility of security, which was proclaimed in 1991 as the OSCE principle, that meant that you cannot strengthen your capacity at the expense of others. Now they treat this differently. They want Eurasia to develop in line with Euro-Atlantic parameters. The Indo-Pacific region, they have AUKUS there. They have the Group of Four, Japan, Korea, Australia, New Zealand. They have Quad with the participation of India. The Quad Americans want to make it political and military organization, and our Indian friends understand this perfectly well. Also, they have the arms, they have the military capacity of Taiwan. Attempts to involve the Philippines not into the activities of ASEAN, but into the efforts taken by these bloc constructions led by the United States. If we speak about the Taiwan Strait, everyone says Europeans, Americans, British, that they respect the position of one China, the People's China Republic, but they add, we adhere to this position, but no one should change the status quo. And what is the status quo? Independent Taiwan. It is obvious. And the People's China Republic, on numerous occasions, points out to everyone who comes from the United States on a regular basis to Taiwan that this is an unacceptable thing to do. Likewise, it is unacceptable to receive delegations from Taiwan when they travel around the world. President Putin, speaking right here on June the 14th, besides our position on Ukrainian settlement that I have already mentioned, we need to resolve the NATO issue once and forever, and to restore the rights of the Russian people, the right for their religion, for the language, which were exterminated. In this very hall, he spoke about the need to build the Eurasian architecture. The Eurasian architecture, which will be just like the African Union, CELAC, which will be open for all countries on the continent. We have been talking about this for a decade or so, when during the first ASEAN summit, President Putin came up with the initiative of a greater Eurasian partnership. Some agreements are already in place with the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, Eurasian Economic Union, with ASEAN as well, and now we are working with the Gulf Cooperation Council. When we speak about this partnership, logistics, economic partnership, when we say that it should be open for all countries on the continent, we mean that in this case we use all the benefits we have, and we mean that the western part of the continent should also be involved. And somehow, and sometimes, they demonstrate their interest in doing so to promote the idea of the Greater Eurasian Partnership. We harmonize the programs of integration organizations which are in place. This process is underway. In the same vein, the Belt and Road Initiative is implemented. The Northern Sea Route, the Persian Gulf, Chittagong Port, Bangladesh, Mumbai, Far East. These are very promising projects. That's what we call a Greater Eurasian Partnership. And when this partnership gains ground, and we have all the premises to say that it will happen, this will enable us to set up more competitive, more efficient ways of economic exchanges. And this will become the material basis for the Eurasian security architecture. The dialogue has already been launched to discuss the matter in October in Minsk. We participated at the second Eurasian Security Conference. Which brought together also the members of government from Serbia, from Hungary. The Minister of Foreign Affairs took part for the second consecutive time, and they demonstrated their interest in this concept. Belarusians, as the hosts of this conference, now they are trying to do everything needed to make this conference a regular event. We supported their initiative to elaborate before the next session of this Eurasian Security Conference, a draft of the Eurasian Charter for Diversity and Multipolarity in the 21st century. That is why I believe that we should think about the ways how the Eurasian continent can develop based on the interest, first and foremost, of the states of the Eurasian continent. Not from the point of view of the Euro-Atlantic, but just on the basis what history gave us and what nature gave us. This process is open for anyone without any exception, for any state on our Eurasian continent. Cyprus is an island, but you are also invited. CDF, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Armin Körper is my name, from German television ZDF. We have talked about a possible meeting between President Putin and President Trump already. What part could you see for the European Union and countries like Germany in possible negotiations about the Ukraine conflict? Thank you.
Я считаю, что Германия уже сыграла свою роль.
I believe that Germany has already played its part, played its role when they became and when they behaved as guarantors, like Chancellor Merkel and President Hollande, when they said that the Minsk agreements, which were drafted and elaborated in the capital of Belarus for almost 20 hours, which were concluded between Russia, Ukraine, Germany, and France. They said that this was a peace treaty between Moscow and Kiev, and we are, France and Germany, we are the guarantors of this treaty. They interpreted the status of the participants differently. Their position was, we, France and Germany, we are guarantors. We made you sit at the negotiation table, and we are guarantors. This document, Minsk agreements, we brought this document to the UN Security Council. Unanimously, it was endorsed there. And they urged us to implement these Minsk agreements. I'm not going to enumerate hundreds and thousands of violations committed by the Kiev regime, including bombardments of civilian sites, of civilian infrastructure, complete blockade of the territories who refused to recognize the results of the coup d'etat. We submitted all these facts to the United Nations, to the OSCE on a regular basis, and France and Germany responded to us. We told them, you are guarantors, stop this, just stop this. Last year, Angela Merkel, when she retired, she said no one was going to implement these agreements.
Neither them nor France nor the then Poroshenko president who signed the documents back at the time. They simply wanted to win a couple of years in order to better prepare Ukraine for a war. Well, we've already spoken about the Yalta-Potsdam system enshrined in the UN Charter. According to the UN Charter, UN Security Council decisions are necessary for implementation for everyone, and Chancellor Merkel said she didn't want to be guided by these provisions. although she was one of the parties to this document. And to this document, a four-lateral declaration between Russia, Ukraine, France, and Germany was attached. And this declaration spoke about a common space between Lisbon and Vladivostok, about our plans to build it, that France and Germany would help Donbass ensure and put in place a mobile banking. They haven't done anything of the sort. They also wanted to help lifting the blockade. It wasn't done. They wanted to facilitate negotiations in order to resolve the issues related to gas transport. They wanted to help Russia and Ukraine in this field too. Nothing of the sort was accomplished. So with all due respect to the history of the German people, I believe it has already made its contribution through the Chancellor Merkel's office and administration. And you know, Putin never denies any proposals of entering the contacts. Scholz has already called him on a couple of times. They had a telephone conversation recently, and Chancellor Scholz was proud of having made such a heroic deed. There have been several phone conversations with some other representatives of the European Union. I hope President won't be too angry with me. I'm not revealing any secrets. But in the conversation with President Putin, Scholz hasn't said anything that he wouldn't have said publicly every second day. He said we have to go back. He didn't utter a word about the root causes, about the Russian language and the Russians whom Zelensky wants to occupy his territory. Although back in 2021, even before the special military operation, Zelensky said, if you feel yourself to be Russian in Ukraine, then you'd better leave to Russia, for the sake of your grandchildren and children. And a short time ago, he even used some indecent words when he spoke about the Russian peacekeepers. Well, whether or not he is adequate, it's a different question. Turkey was already a place where an agreement was reached and initialed. Boris Johnson, who is now publishing some books, prohibited Ukraine from signing a treaty based on the principles negotiated in Istanbul. There was a series of meetings in Belarus, and President Lukashenko reiterated that as a close neighbor immediate neighbor of Russia and Ukraine, he believes that Belarusian interests have to be taken into consideration, and we value his position. So we see a broad interest, a broad support for the possibility of a telephone conversation and then a personal meeting between presidents of Russia and the US. It's because of an understanding. Well, they did understand it a long time ago. Now they started recognizing that it's not about Ukraine. Thing is that Ukraine wanted to use Ukraine in order to weaken Russia in the context of the Russian place in the system of European security. There are two aspects in this. First, threats on our western frontiers have to be eliminated. It is one of the main root causes, and they can only be eliminated in the context of some broad agreements. We are ready to discuss security guarantees for a country that is called Ukraine these days, or part of this country that hasn't expressed its view yet, unlike Donbass and Novorossiya. But the Eurasian context will be predominant in those negotiations, because the western part of the continent cannot separate itself from such giants as Russia, China, India, the Persian Gulf, the whole of Southeast Asia with hundreds of millions of people, including Bangladesh and Pakistan. So we have to shape the continent in order to make sure that affairs in the central part of this continent, in Central Asia, in the Caucasus, in the Far East, in the Strait of Taiwan, in the South China Sea, are resolved by the countries of the region and not by Stoltenberg, who says we're going to work there because security of the NATO depends on the Asia-Pacific region. In what way is it dependent on it? He really said it. He was asked whether NATO is still a defense alliance. He said, yes, it is a defense alliance. We protect the territories of our members, but the security of our members in the modern day in reality is dependent on the security in the Asia-Pacific region. That is why NATO will deploy its infrastructure in the region. It would create alliances between the US and South Korea, for example. They already have a military alliance with a nuclear component. They reaffirmed it just a short time ago, and so on and so forth. Another interesting issue for the political analysts is to think about how to bring all these aspects together. The Euro-Atlantic approach to the entire Eurasia, let me assure you, it is an illusion. Irina.
Could you please provide more information about the Iran-Russia Comprehensive Strategic Partnership Treaty? What messages does the treaty convey, and are there any concerns from third parties about it? Thanks.
Ну, осталось подождать.
Well, it remains 3 or 4 days until the visit of President of Iran. It has already been announced. Our presidents will sign the treaty. Whether someone likes it or not, well, usually this question is asked by our Western colleagues, because they always want to find a topic in any issue that would show that Russia, Iran, Russia and China, DPRK always do something against someone. And our treaty, just as our treaty with DPRK, is not aimed against any country whatsoever. It is constructive, and it is aimed at strengthening the capacities both of Russia and Iran, as well as our friends in different parts of the world, to make us more capable of developing our economies, resolving social issues, and ensuring our defense capabilities. Al-Maidin. Good afternoon, Mr. Lavrov. We know that Russia is contributing to the development of multipolar world order. It looks like after Russia leaves the Middle East, a unipolar world order led by the US will establish itself in the region. What steps can be expected from Russia in the region, particularly bearing in mind that the population respects Russia very much and is expecting Russia to play a role? Well, you know, you represent a journalist school. You made 2 statements. Russia has left the Middle East. It is something you don't assume needs any discussion, then you say everything is ruled by the US, and then you ask what should be done. I would disagree with both statements. We are not leaving the Middle East. Yes, certain events have taken place in Syria. President has commented on them, as well as some of our representatives. And largely, these events happened due to the fact that in the past years, in the past decade, starting from the moment when, upon request of the president of the Syrian Arab Republic, we sent our troops over there, and after we created the Astana format with Turkey and Iran, in which a number of Arab countries were involved. Over that period, there has been a slowing down of a political process. And probably there was a temptation not to change anything. We thought it was wrong, and we tried to push the Syrian leadership to making sure that the Constitution Committee that was established upon the Russian initiative back in 2019 at a special conference dedicated to between the Syrian parties in Sochi, to make sure this Constitutional Committee that became inactive after 2 or 3 meetings to resume its work. However, the leadership in Damascus was not particularly eager, let me put it this way, to make sure it is operational and reaches an agreement. And only one agreement was possible, that is to separate powers, to share powers with the opposition. Obviously not with terrorists. So time was lost, and in parallel, social problems exacerbated. The sanctions imposed by the US stifled the economy. The eastern part, that is particularly rich in resources in oil, with fruitful soils, remain occupied by the US. And the situation is used in order to incite separatist sentiments in the northeast of Syria. We proposed our colleagues from the Kurdish organizations to help build bridges with the central power, but they were not particularly eager to do so. They thought Americans would stay there forever, and they would create their quasi-state there. We tried to persuade them that Iraq and Turkey would never allow a Kurdish state to be built. But it so happened that the Kurdish issue could explode the entire region. We wanted to make sure that Kurdish interests are ensured in the best way in Syria and Iran and in Turkey, obviously. So Damascus was not full of enthusiasm for negotiations. Kurds weren't either. Different platforms mentioned by the UN Security Council as immediate participants of the settlement prospects, such as the Moscow platform, the Cairo problem, a platform that was based in Istanbul. And in between of them, among them, there were only few contacts. And as a result, there was a vacuum. And in the vacuum, an explosion took place. We have to accept the realities. Our embassy hasn't moved away from Damascus. They have daily contacts, routine contacts, and we want to be useful in the efforts to normalize the situation, and it requires an inclusive national dialogue in Syria with participation of all political, ethnic, confessional forces, and with participation of all foreign actors. I've had contacts with our colleagues from Turkey, from the Gulf countries. They've just held a second meeting after Jordan in Saudi Arabia with participation of Arabs, Turkey, and some Western countries. They assume this process has to be joined by Russia and China and obviously Iran. If someone is really willing to initiate a lasting process aimed at a real result instead of settling scores again with their competitors and rivals on the Syrian territory. So we are open for a conversation. The Astana format can play its role. I've already mentioned that Russia, Turkey, and Iran cooperate with Jordan, Iraq, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and other countries show interest. When we held the meeting in Doha on the 7th of December, Pedersen said we have to urgently convene an international conference with participation of all Syrians and all foreign actors. So we are looking forward to it. Reuters. Good afternoon, Mr. Lavrov. Next Monday, Donald Trump will be inaugurated as the 46th President of the United States. What are your expectations from the incoming administration, and what are your expectations in terms of Russia-US relations? Thank you. Well, it is our expectation that a new team will formulate its approach to international affairs. I do understand that President Trump has a will to do so, has mentioned it publicly. But we equally understand that the future president has an enormous responsibility for the state of affairs in his own country, taking into account the situation that he has inherited, in particular in Los Angeles and in California. It is a catastrophe what's happening with the people over there. President Trump also announced that settling the situation with migrants would be a priority. He has already announced a set of measures. Again, he has first to move into the office. For the time being, all his explanations, all his considerations don't have a practical value. So let's wait until the new administration has formulated its official attitudes. Americans are looking forward to it. They have many problems left behind by Biden, and obviously those interested in a constructive role of the United States on the international arena on various crisis situations are looking forward to it. Pakistani television, please.
Sergey Viktorovich, Morskaya dictatorship.
Mr. Minister, the maritime doctrine of Russia believes that the Indian Ocean is a strategic area for it. How can Pakistan capitalize on its relations with SCO and BRICS countries? And where does this doctrine of Russia stand in, so that we could acquire long-term benefits? And how can you characterize today's level of relations between Russia and Pakistan? Well, I believe that we have been improving and enhancing our relations. Currently, we have the most positive stage for decades, and our relations are evolutionizing, and there's a range of projects to restore many of the facilities created back in the Soviet times for the Pakistani economy. And we can see reciprocal interest to cooperate in the fight against terrorism. Pakistan is also a victim and a target, but that requires joining hands with your Afghan neighbors, with India and with other SCO member countries, because Afghanistan, Central Asia and Pakistan are used as a breeding ground by bad guys in order to make and execute their malign and unlawful designs. The SCO has the anti-terrorist structure that works well and helps exchange information. And actually, the financing of terrorism is closely linked with drug trafficking and other organized crime. So for a number of years, we've been promoting an overture to establish a single center to fight new threats, including human trafficking, drug trafficking, terrorism, and other scourges. And in this, I hope this year we'll be able to execute that, to implement that, and bring it into life. And I hope that all the organizational steps are important. But what is more important is to strengthen and build confidence inside SCO and within the Afghan format, the current Afghan format, Russia, China, Pakistan, and Iran. We are certain that engaging India would be a right thing to do. So generally, SCO and the Afghan format and the Moscow format would be additional frameworks where India, Pakistan, and China would have more opportunities to communicate, to be able to better understand each other, to ask disturbing questions and get and analyze answers. And we would be lending a helping hand. We'll do our best to help. This is in the interests of us and the SCO and the region by and large. So I can see it is the Vietnamese news outlet, information agency. Very good afternoon. My name is Dam Hang. I represent the Vietnamese Information Agency. I had two questions. One of them was already voiced, so only one is left. Well, the Prime Minister of Russia, Mikhail Mishustin, is currently paying an official visit to Hanoi. And the focus now is on whether Russia participates in the NPT construction of what? A nuclear power plant on Vietnamese soil. The project was designed 10 years ago. If a positive decision is made, how shall the situation change for the bilaterals of Russia and Vietnam? Well, the main change in the bilaterals would be a positive decision on the NPT construction. Well, you know, our bilaterals will be supplemented by other joint projects, and we have many of them with Vietnam. Let me single out the tropical center that is now being modernized. Also, we have joint projects in hydrocarbons production, Rus-Viet, Soviet, Petro, and others. These are companies operating on each other's soil. So the nuclear power is based on high-tech and state-of-the-art solutions. And as President Putin said repeatedly, we're not merely building a nuclear power plant. We establish a brand new industry for a nation, including personnel training and researchers training to work on that nuclear power plant. And some commercial aspects may also develop in Turkey. The nuclear power plant belongs to us entirely. It will just pay taxes and supply power In other cases, the ownership is on a parity basis with the host nation. So formats differ, but it is certain that we will have another high-tech project in our bilaterals. And today we spoke about Ukraine, and we also have heard that Vietnam is ready to host talks on Ukraine. We're grateful for that, and we appreciate the warm attitude and the sentiment of our Vietnamese friends, but we cannot comment at this point of time because currently there are no specific proposals, and the goals of ours are and objectives of ours are to be carried through. So the Japanese median sitting next. You do not look like a Japanese. We'll try. Good afternoon. Yuri Kiriyanko from Sanki Simbun newspaper. I have two questions. Number one, whether Russia-Japan relations could further deteriorate after the inauguration of Trump, given his desire to strengthen the alliance with Japan. Are you concerned about that? Does it worry you? And which of the areas of the Russia-Japan relations will suffer most? So the question about whether we can dive even deeper, well, I cannot respond because all the nosedive and the destruction of all the foundations of our relations, including a regular, respectful political dialogue, was initiated by the Japanese neighbors. Russia did not venture anything of that kind. When we became desperate to see the implementation of the obligations and promises given by the Western countries, including the non-expansion of NATO eastwards and non-engagement of Ukraine in NATO and prevention of the Nazism taking root in Ukraine that now exterminates all belonging to the Russian language and culture. And despite the Minsk set of measures, the Russian residents were bombed. And when we faced a wall of, I wouldn't say misunderstanding, but deafness, they just didn't want to listen to us. So we launched this special military operation to protect our security interests and the interests of the Russian speakers in Ukraine. Japan received a command to join sanctions and snapped the salute. So this is life. Sometimes we receive signals about like resuming talks on the peace treaty and like let our people go to the Kuril Islands on some of the cultural motives. Well, someone just brings a message without any signature, without truly yours, or with huge respect. So the Japanese were always famous for their delicate rituals, cuisine, and attitudes to life. Refinedness has unfortunately disappeared in the way they treat us. But there are some of the exceptions sometimes. Well, actually, we never let culture or sports or joint projects in education fall prey to politics. We never did so, and we appreciate that despite what has been happening, Japan receives Russian performers and artists touring each autumn and hold days of Russian culture. So not all the countries have the nerve to do so nowadays. So in case your employers apply such approaches and such qualities to manifest their self-dignity, that would be in the interests of the Japanese people. And my second question, if you allow me. The Cabinet of Ministers of Russia has compiled the list of unfriendly nations and territories, and the island of Taiwan is there. So I assume it was a de facto item, but actually, de jure, it means part of the Chinese territory put on that unfriendly nations list. Whether the Chinese side voiced any protests, and how can you comment on that? Well, currently, despite the fact that we have a representative office of the Moscow-Taipei chamber, well, Taiwan proclaimed sanctions against us, and this is the criterion. Well, it may sound a bit cumbersome, but actually we assume that the term unfriendly may be used to the governments that join the sanctions. There are no unfriendly peoples for us, so and our Chinese friends are well aware of that. Italy answer.
The Italian Prime Minister Meloni is trying to build a special relationship with Mr. Trump now. If Mr. Trump opens a new policy of dialogue with Russia, a new peace initiatives with Russia, do you think that what could be the role of Italy? Could be Italy, this Italian government, be among the first ones to follow this line, this new line of towards Russia? Thank you.
Я, честно скажу, понятия не имею.
Actually, I have no idea which the role of Italy might be, or which role Italy might play. We cannot prompt and tell sovereign governments what to do and how to act. And actually, also because those sovereign governments demand that we behave as they want us to behave. Well, in your question, you had the deeply ingrained thought that when Trump takes office, everybody will have to take sides, whether they side with Trump or against him. So when Trump finally arrives in office, Italy's role probably will be clearer. Colleagues from Azerbaijan. Good afternoon. Rustamov Ilbar, agency report. How can you characterize 2024 in the context of the Russia-Azerbaijan relations? And what can you tell us about plans and prospects for 2025? And my second question, and you have partly answered that, but still, the rapprochement between Armenia and the West, how can that impact the security situation in the South Caucasus? With respect to the bilaterals with Azerbaijan, I have a high esteem for them, and they are confidence-built, and presidents communicate regularly, and there are no banned or tabooed topics. Presidents Putin and Aliyev established formats for the governments, respective governments, to seek new promising projects like the North-South corridor and other transport routes in the Caucasus and around it, and the Caucasus and the Caspian Sea becoming shallow. And now we are creating a bilateral WG. We wanted to turn it into a five-way working group so that all the Caspian states participate. We also cooperate on the international arena. We have contacts and make practical steps to improve the security situation, fight against terrorism and organized crime, and we maintain contacts between our military and special services. So these are structured, well-structured relations, allowing to resolve all sorts of issues quickly in the evidence-based style when like incidents occur. For example, during the second war in Karabakh, a helicopter of ours was down by mistake, or when now this crash happened of an Azerbaijani plane in Aktau, and we appreciate the fact that the Azerbaijani friends immediately supported the engagement of Russia in that investigation, and a special meeting in Brazil was conducted, and the black boxes were opened, and lots of information was extracted, and that information prompts us to wait for the outcomes of the investigation without indulging in hype and instigation, because many of the news are not confirmed by the black boxes information. We cooperate with my counterpart, Foreign Minister of Azerbaijan, and our ministries have a long-term consultations plan on foreign policy matters, starting with the UN agenda and OSCE, and up to the most relevant topics of climate, and in the wake of Baku hosting the 29th COP of the UNFCCC. So in 2025, we expect this confidential relationship to evolutionize further, more actively. And the second part of your question was, and I had a second question. Well, the rapprochement of Armenia with the EU and the US, how can that impact the security situation in the region? Well, you know, we will inevitably move and then end up in a situation that has been predicted by Russia and Turkey and Azerbaijan. Members of the regional players will be in charge of resolving all the problems, all the issues.
A couple of minutes ago, when answering to the previous question, I mentioned that we have a shared continent with its own regions: Central Asia, Caucasus, South Caucasus, and so on and so forth, Siberia, South Asia, Far East. And no doubt that when some states which are far away from our territories, and I should say from our traditions, they do not understand history in its non-colonial dimension when they say that they are going to help everyone. I don't see a problem from the point of view of contacts, but when they say that the European Union mission will be to guarantee security in some regions, I don't understand this. That is why we actively supported the initiative made by President Aliyev, so did President Erdogan, to set up 3+3 mechanism. 3 South Caucasus states and their 3 neighbors: Azerbaijan, Armenia, Georgia, Russia, Turkey, and Iran. We have already had our first contacts. Our Georgian neighbors haven't yet taken the seat. They have been assigned, but this seat is always open at the negotiation table. I believe this format to be more productive and more efficient. Lately, I heard that Armenia and Azerbaijan have almost come to terms when it comes to a peace treaty, and the 2 pending issues they still have. It is quite difficult to bypass them somehow. They should decide them either positively, or negatively. And then the European Union wanted to assist them again. This is the sovereign decision of Armenia and Azerbaijan, where they should sign the document as soon as it is negotiated. But the aspiration of Brussels and Washington that it was them who decided the whole thing, it testifies one more time that they want to show that they are the masters of everywhere. There are some proverbs in Russian to describe the situation. Good afternoon, dear friends. Thank you very much for this opportunity to ask the question. I'm Timothy V. I'm the host of the Fake Control program. Minister Lavrov, thank you very much for assisting in the organization of the Forum on Dialogue on Fakes, which took place in November. We declared that we have set up the global fact-checking network. I did not get it right at the first time. Fact-check or check-fact. Perhaps we will face some challenges. We will discuss them later. The actions of the Western governments, they do not go in line with the opinion of the population of these states. That is why we were open to invite to participate in the forum activities the representatives from Western states and non-friendly states of the United States and the European Union. Do you believe that this strategy is right? Or in the name of efficiency, we should focus on the so-called friendly states? I would not make this platform a closed format, and this is a hallmark of our information efforts. Madam Zavharova would reaffirm this when this hysteria was about to begin, just before the special military operation. When Macron came to Russia, Putin went to visit Macron, and we held some informal dinners. Back then, we asked a question to the French: why the Sputnik TV and RT have no accreditation to the White House? They answered, these are not mass media. These are the tools of propaganda. They never had accreditation in the United States. They were even banned from some events. We also cited one example, the year 1990. The euphoria in our relations was sliding back, and in the fall of 1990, the OC conference, one document was adopted, among others, the document on access to information, which was pushed forward by France, by the European Union and some other Western states. This document said that all governments had to guarantee access to any kind of information for their population. Information generated inside the state and information coming from abroad. They wanted to support this perestroika period in Russia, which was eliminating all kinds of barriers, and now they are blocking all the channels. They are introducing some bans, as far as I understand, and we asked the French, why are you doing so? Here is the OSCE document, your own wordings. They are unwilling to listen to us. We also have some limits, but they are clearly regulated and indicated. The content which might be found sensible, which has to do with children, with our traditional values, but in the West, they block any information criticizing the actions of the government. It is not only criticizing the actions of the government, but it is the information based on facts. This fact-checking. I understand that these words of the English origin, it is difficult to replace them. But I believe that we should not be afraid of them. Let them come, let them see and listen. Here we have some foreign journalists, and someone can't come, isn't it? No, we are open for everyone. Their news agencies, they do not allow their journalists to come from Germany and from France. And why they are here? They are working here. Now, I see we have the representative of Komsomolskaya Pravda, and France doesn't give accreditation to the correspondence of Komsomolskaya Pravda. Many unpleasant things that we saw on the last page. Minister Lavrov, I have a question. The other day, we received a letter from a schoolgirl from Malta. She's 12 years old, but she loves Russia, and she asked me to ask you a question which she finds very important. At school, I sometimes face the biased attitude to Russia. I believe that other children living in Europe, they hear false statements, they hear falsehood about Russia. What should we do in such a situation? We have internet. The information we have is online. It is no longer on paper. Websites of our foreign ministry, the website of the Russian State Library, and many other organizations, many other libraries, they also have their own websites. No one can prohibit to use them. I would wonder if she had access to them. We can send her a computer as part of our program, the Christmas Tree of Wishes. Telesur, the floor is yours. I'm Oleg Yasinski, Venezuela, Nicaragua, and Cuba, Telesur. Minister Lavrov, my first question. The year 2024 became the year when, in many parts of the world, we see that the far-right forces, the far-right powers are gaining ground. They deny any principles of peaceful coexistence, any integrity and self-determination. What does Russia think of these new political and social trends, and what can we do to change this situation? This was my first question. My second question, what are Russian priorities and key projects in Latin America in 2025? I would like to make some clarifications you mentioned some far-right forces which flatly deny the principle of equal rights, the principle of self-determination. You mean in Europe? Yes, in Western Europe, in Germany, in France, the far-right forces which have gained ground. Don't you mean the National Front and the Alternative for Germany? Frankly speaking, the National Front and the Alternative for Germany, these are systemic parties. They are the part of the parliament. People vote for them, and the share of those who vote for them is increasing. I have spoken to the representatives both of the Alternative for Germany and the National Front, and frankly speaking, I cannot accuse them of being against the right of people to self-determination. I think it is just the opposite. The National Front in France, the Alternative for Germany, they want national to restore national consciousness and national self-determination to restore, because a considerable part of this had been usurpated by Brussels. That is why it's quite difficult to comment on the issue. To say that they are coming up with such disruptive programs, I wouldn't say so. If you cite some examples, it would be possible for me to comment on them. Members of the Alternative for Germany parties, they take part in political talk shows on the Russian TV, and they share the ideas which are first and foremost focused at the need to overcome problems in Russian-German relations. They discuss well-known facts which have been known for many decades and for many centuries. They testify to the aspiration of Anglo-Saxons to prevent Russia and Germany bring together their capacity. I believe that there are many rational and useful things in their ideas, so if you have some concrete examples, I will try to comment on them. With respect to Latin America, we consider Latin America as one of powerful poles of this emerging multipolar world order. We have multidimensional of relations with almost all Latin American states, with our friends from Brazil. Apart from bilateral formats, we also cooperate within BRICS. And we handed our chairship in BRICS over to Brazil. No doubt that this is a promising direction. With Brazil, we have a military, technical, economic agenda. In Argentina, our embassy is functioning quite actively. We are trying to establish a relationship with the new president, with his team, to understand what potential capabilities we have there. Our main allies, Venezuela, Cuba, Nicaragua. We are watching closely the developments in Bolivia in the run-up to the election campaign. We witness the facts which prove that the United States is trying to interfere, is trying to fracture the progressive forces, but there is nothing surprising about that. We actively support CELAC, especially when, after President Lula took office, the CELAC gained the second wind, and they are willing to develop alternative payment platforms which would reduce the dependence on the abuse of dollar position on a global market with Mercosur. We also have relations with them. Central American integration systems, ALBA, and many others. At the inauguration ceremony of Nicolas Maduro, we were also presented there. Volodin had good negotiations with Mr. President. I expect a very fruitful year. Two last questions. The lady over there, over to you. This is how one can have your attention. Good afternoon. At the initiative of the organization, the movement of leaders, the movement of the first ones, the children wanted to have an association of child organizations. Do you believe that these organizations are important? How can children help in international policy? And what can you recommend to us? You know, we have a good number of child organizations that revive and adapt our previous formats, our previous experience. They adapt the organization of pioneers, for example, of Komsomol to new realities. It is always a pleasure to reminisce about the years I spent as a member of Komsomol. Perhaps this will be useful. I recall the practical activities we had. Some field trips, some concerts. Everything which builds the team spirit. Everything that has to do with the practical work. Now we have discussions about the discussions on important matters at schools. This is quite a good contribution, but there should be a pause for the youth, which also would be useful for them. I did not know about this initiative. If you send your plans, the information you have, so that we have a better understanding what you mean and what we could do, we will do. If we can have some contacts with young children, depending on their interests, depending on their age, which could bring them familiar to the foreign policy, we will do so.
Thank you so much, Madam Zaharova. I will stand up. Please be seated. Please remain seated, if you may. Sergey Lavrov, editor-in-chief of Environment and Society newspaper. It has existed for 25 years in St. Petersburg. And I also represent Donbass in Leningrad Oblast. I have participated in the St. Petersburg Economic Forum and I spent 3 days in Donetsk. I delivered the humanitarian assistance over there. But my question is about something slightly different. I see that the topic of planetary security and space debris as one of the most important for all countries. I'm not only talking about Donbass, Ukraine, the Russian city of Odessa, the Russian city of Kharkov, the Russian city of Kiev. With the academic circles in Russia, we raised the topic and they asked me to convey this question to you about the Russia-Morocco relations. Because in Africa, Morocco considers itself to be a gate to the continent, and I would like to know your attitude to the prospects of Russian-Moroccan relations. It is a question from the academic circles of St. Petersburg. And a second question that is particularly important to me. The Russian Foreign Ministry is an guardian angel of international security on the Earth planet, and we have very highly assessment of your work. But the topic of environmental security is high on the agenda. Russia is an environmental donor on the planet, and the US is an anti-environmental vampire, so to say, that pumps the global richness into its resources. And talking about contamination of the planet, we can see that in the low Earth orbit there are 178 million elements of space debris, and whatever Elon Musk is doing, in some years, no state will be capable of launching a satellite or anything by 2055. It is according to academic estimates. So my question is the following. Can you personally, or our foreign ministry, or the president of the Russian Federation, Mr. Putin, put forward an initiative with the new U.S. administration and U.S. President Donald Trump and all space powers in order to convene, in order to hold and carry out an environmental campaign and find ways to clear our low Earth space? I believe this question will be high on the political agenda very soon. For the time being, it's being discussed in academic circles, but I wanted to ask you this. So I have two questions on Morocco and the global environmental security. Well, the second question is discussed in the Committee on the Outer Space at the UN. For obvious reasons, I'm not an expert. I know debris is something bad. But what ways are needed to address this problem? It is something that has been very practically discussed by scientists. I believe information is available on the internet. I have no doubts about it. As for Morocco, it is a friendly country. Last year, a year ago in February, we held a regular meeting of the Cooperation Council of the Russian Arab Forum. We were in the city of Marrakesh. There were excellent arrangements. There was a reception by the head of the government, and we have very ambitious plans. We help Americans address the problems that are in the scope of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. I'm talking primarily about the West Sahara problem. In this, we should be guided by resolutions of the UN Security Council, and we've spoken about the UN Security Council on many occasions today already. We've spoken equally today about the right of the peoples for self-determination. So 40 years ago, the Security Council stated that the issue of West Sahara should be decided based on the principle of self-determination, the will of the people, the citizens. Back at the time, I was a representative. I was working in the UN, and I had a friend, Jim Baker, a former Secretary of State of the United States, and he even proposed some maps, some plans, specific plans, how the elders would participate in the decision-making process. 40 years on, nothing has changed. There's been no progress. It is a difficult issue for the peoples of Morocco. Then, when Trump was first elected as U.S. president, they adopted a decree that West Sahara is Morocco. Now the Panama Canal and Greenland are on the agenda. While resolving such issues in a unilateral manner only means provoking a storm that will break out in some time. We have to look for generally accepted solutions. We know how important it is for Morocco, and we'll do our best in order to facilitate the resolution but it's only possible to address the issue based on the bilateral consent rather than imposing something on one side. Channel 1. It is an abuse of your administrative resource. You have number 4 and you said 1. But we'll give the last question to Channel 1. I can only welcome it. Well, colleagues, I'll simply have something planned. Ivan Blagoy, Channel 1. I still have a German SIM card in my smartphone. The bans that existed in Germany with regards to the Russian resources still exist. So this hardware is linked to the phone number. But we are not only talking about the bans and blockings, but problems that Russian journalists have when they work in Western countries. What's wrong with them? With the representatives of Western authorities that such problems arise, and is there any link between these problems and the progress of the Russian army during the special military operation? And if you allow a second question about gas. The operator of Nord Stream 2 in Switzerland may go bankrupt in spring this year. Western media write that probably it will be bought by U.S. investor. Can you comment on this strange situation in the context of the ostrich position of Scholz? Thank you. It's very fortunate that you received a word from Madam Zakharova, because the very first question was about journalists as well, and then I said that unlike Western officials, Western administrations, we never wanted and we don't want to limit the journalists in their work, and Maria would only confirm that I'm right. Long before the special military operation, when our journalists were persecuted, and some journalists were even accused of espionage. For a long time, for several years, we didn't respond to it. And when asked why we don't want to take responsive measures, we said we don't want to repeat bad manners. Back in 2017, the FAR bill was for the first time applied against Russia Today. Yes, and we started responding a year and a half or 2 years later, when we simply could no longer tolerate it. Well, you asked what's wrong with them. It's hard to say, but apart from something that's obvious, probably they don't want to know the truth. They don't want the society, the population to break free from this information balloon when there is a narrative about the killed babies by the servants of the Russian army. In order not to destroy these myths, I have nothing to add. And what was your second question? Nord Stream. It was not in the Western media that I read about the bankruptcy that should happen after a short period of time. I didn't know it would be sold to the Americans. It was something that was said by President Vucic. It was his prediction on the eve of the new year. He said, you would see that I'm right. It will happen in the next year. Well, looting is something that has always been part of the methods that Western countries are used to apply. They live at the expense of others, starting from the colonial era. Looting, that's what it is. Distinguished colleagues, allow me to conclude our press conference at this. All those who sent our written questions during the registration process will receive answers in written. Thank you so much.